Now, I realize when someone with my accent says they want to talk about the Civil War, that makes people a little nervous, but please bear with me. When I was in fourth grade, I always liked to read, and I was in the school library just looking for a book, and for whatever reason, I picked up a book about Abraham Lincoln. And I was immediately just so fascinated by the story. I was 9 years old. We didn't really have history class yet. This is the first I had ever heard of the Civil War, this terribly violent story about how this country ripped itself apart and put it back together. Now, when you're a young Civil War enthusiast in rural Arkansas, your elders make a point to, it's good that you like history, but they want to make sure you get the real history. You know, things like, the War of Northern Aggression, and it was about states' rights. Slavery had nothing to do with it. We were defending ourselves against a tyrannical federal government. Now, these dissertations, if we could call them that, were certainly interesting, but I was reading these books written by actual historians, and it wasn't jiving. So about a decade later, I walked right up the hill here into the Memorial Classroom building into a Civil War and Reconstruction class taught by Dr. Bill Shea. And on the first day of class, he says, let's get this out of the way right now. This was a war about slavery. And I thought, can it really be that simple? So this is the first time that I, as an aspiring young historian, I decided to do work in the manner of historians. I was going to consult what we call primary sources. Primary sources are sources that were created during the time you're asking questions about. So the first state to secede from the Union was South Carolina. Did they tell us why? Yeah, of course they did. This is from a document titled, this is a mouthful, The Declaration of the Immediate Causes Which Induce and Justify the Secession of South Carolina from the Federal Union. I feel like they could have shortened that a little. So it starts with a long discourse about the Constitution that's written in 19th century legalese, and it gets to the meat of the matter. The Constitution, in its fourth article, proves as follows. No person held to service or labor in one state, escaping into another, shall be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party on whom such service or labor may be due. This stipulation was so material to the compact that without it, the compact would not have been made. The greater number of contracting parties held slaves, etc., etc. The only state's right that South Carolina was concerned with was their constitutional right to own people. In fact, in that very same document, they explicitly criticize a number of northern states for passing what were called personal liberty laws to circumvent the Federal Fugitive Slave Act that passed in 1850. So one of South Carolina's reasons for leaving the Union was northern states exercising states' rights. Now, I wanted to go through every Confederate state secession documents, but they told me I couldn't talk that long. So I thought we would ask someone, who could speak for the Confederacy as a whole. Like a really high up government official, like Vice President. The Vice President of the Confederacy was a man named Alexander Hamilton Stevens. He's the fellow up here that looks like a 12-year-old boy with some scars. Mr. Vice President, why? Why did you secede and write a new constitution and start a new country? Was the Constitution really necessary? Why? The new Constitution has put to rest forever all the agitating questions relating to our peculiar institution, African slavery, as it exists amongst us, the proper status of the Negro in our form of civilization. This was the immediate cause of the late rupture and present revolution. You can't really make it more explicit than that, can you? Vice President Stevens, can you make it any more explicit? You can. Our new government is founded upon Its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rest upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition. Now, this is not me giving you a historian's interpretation. I have literally showed you the historical evidence. But millions of Americans still idolize Confederate leaders, Confederate monuments, and yes, Confederate flags. And they rationalize it by claiming that the Confederate cause was something other than the protection of slavery. But you and I, we have just looked directly at the evidence created during the time. So we know, as my mentor Bill Shea would say, that is wrong, incorrect, and just plain not right. So yeah, your great-great-grandfather who didn't own any slaves, but he fought for the Confederacy, this is the cause that he was fighting for. And he knew it, and he was fine with it. All but one of my Civil War ancestors were Confederates. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not embarrassed by it. It's just an interesting historical fact. You can acknowledge the truth of Southern history without apologizing for it, without creating a new narrative that you know contradicts the actual historical evidence. And it doesn't mean that you have to hate the South, or you have to hate your ancestors, or you have to hate yourself for being Southern. You are not responsible for what your ancestors did. You are only responsible for what you do. What I have chosen to do is try to educate my fellow Southerners about this series of lies that we have been fed about our own history, about states' rights and tyrannical governments and all that. It's quite simply not true, and we know it. These two documents took me 30 seconds to Google. They're readily available. Now, I didn't come here to do this because I hate the South. I came here to do this because I love the South, and because I know that we are better than this. There are a lot of really great things about the South. Our history of race relations is not one of them, nor is our history of denying our history of race relations. And that is our responsibility. So how do we do better? I would suggest that first, we start by having an open and honest conversation about these issues. Second, that we get our history from historians instead of our drunk uncles. And third, we listen to people of color when they tell us how things like this affect them. Now, I won't leave you on a down note. I want to leave you with some words of wisdom. And as I often do when I need words of wisdom, I look to stand-up comedians, the great philosophers of our age. And this is a quote from sort of a book that's a love letter to the South by three stand-up comedians. And the quote that I wanted to share with you, because it's very true. The southeastern United States is home to some of the best food, music, athletes, soldiers, whiskey, women, and weather this country has to offer. The home of Mark Twain and Andre 3000 is worth redeeming. So let's build a new history that we don't have to lie to ourselves about to be proud of. Thank you.